The honourable member for Etobicoke North regarding foreign affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. South Sudan faces three concurrent crises with an ongoing conflict, an acute humanitarian crisis, and a chronic food and security problem. South Sudan has a level 3 humanitarian emergency. Violence has displaced over 1 million people. 923,000 within the country, more than half of them children, and 300,000 people have fled to neighboring countries. With the rainy season, the situation will only get worse. Life-saving supplies must be deployed to the hardest to reach in order to avert a humanitarian catastrophe. Airdrops are taking place and famine is probable. Mr. Speaker, the UN has warned that if the conflict in South Sudan continues, half of the country's 12 million people will either be starving, internally displaced, refugees abroad, or dead by the year's end. Mr. Speaker, according to the UN in May, the international community urgently needed to donate at least another $500 million if South Sudan's devastating slide into famine and humanitarian crisis was to be stopped. Therefore, on May 16, 2014, I asked the government, quote, will Canada attend the May 1920 donor pledging conference in Norway, and will it increase its support, end of quote. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the response I received was only an expression of concern. What the government is currently doing and a promise to monitor the situation. That is, I received no answer, no promise to attend the donor conference, and no promise to pledge. Not good enough, when the political divisions within South Sudan had resulted in heavy fighting and mass atrocities. In Bentiu, for example, civilians were targeted on the basis of their ethnicity and nationality. Radio stations were used to broadcast hate speech, urging men to rape women of specific ethnicities and demanding that rival groups be expelled from the town. Mr. Speaker, after receiving no answer from the government regarding the donor conference, we issued a press release calling on the government to send representatives to attend the international conference to see what further help Canada could provide to address the dire humanitarian crisis in South Sudan. Mr. Speaker, why did the government refuse to answer my simple question? That is, would the government attend or not? It is shameful that Canada refused to pledge at the conference. Mr. Speaker, there is overcrowding, competition for shelter and life-saving humanitarian aid, and an increased risk of disease and infection in South Sudan. Mr. Speaker, we have to stand by the people of South Sudan. Expressed concern is not enough. We have to do more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for raising this issue of the situation in South Sudan. While I agree on many points that the situation in South Sudan, due to the conflict and other reasons, is deteriorating very badly, Mr. Speaker, and requires attention, I can tell her in no uncertain terms, contrary to what she has been telling, as to be that Canada is not involved. Mr. Speaker, Canada has been involved in South Sudan from the day that country became independent. Prior to that country becoming independent, Canada was one of the major countries, Mr. Speaker, not only a donor, but in assisting towards achieving the peace, Mr. Speaker. I myself have visited that country twice, Mr. Speaker. Following that, the birth of this nation, we had great hopes, Mr. Speaker, that this would move forward. Unfortunately, the political infighting that has taken place has really put South Sudan way back in the development assistance. We, Canada, with its partners, Mr. Speaker, have been working together to see which is the way best forward, working with the government of South Sudan in moving forward to meeting the development assistance need, Mr. Speaker. Very true, Mr. Speaker, that the UN is there now to stop the fighting. One good news that I would want to share with the Honourable Member came yesterday was that both parties who are now fighting have agreed to a peace in Addis Ababa, led by the African Union, hopefully, Mr. Speaker, that peace will work towards assuring a climate where all those assistance that we have been giving is reaching. There is no need, Mr. Speaker, making announcements or attending donor conferences is not the one very effective way to reach our development assistance. The way it is to work together jointly with other partners that we have identified, and in the case of South Sudan, we have identified, Mr. Speaker, partners of which we can do. Matter of fact, only 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, I in Calgary announced development assistance to the Red Cross for them to use mobile units for the child maternity cases in South Sudan, Mr. Speaker. So we are working with our NGO partners, we are working with them. Canada is on the ground in South Sudan. We wish the people of South Sudan, and very quickly they resolve the political differences and they move forward, and the situation, as the Honourable Member has been describing, is averted, most importantly, the humanitarian crisis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Etobicoke North.
Mr. Speaker, we all hope that the good news yesterday will hold. The government has given in the past, but its approach needs to be rethought and needs to take into consideration the long-term problems caused by the civil conflict begun in December 2013. Will the government support civil society coalitions that are working for peace and reconciliation in South Sudan? How will the government monitor humanitarian needs and respond in a timely fashion to the changing needs on the ground? Will the government consider support to UNMISS to protect civilians, especially women and children, from violence? Will the government encourage the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children in Armed Conflict to travel to South Sudan and request a report to the UN Security Council on the situation of children in South Sudan? Canada must remain engaged to keep South Sudan at the forefront of international attention, and we do hope this news yesterday continues. The good news holds.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the Honourable Member that Canada is working with the United Nations, with many of the issues she's talking about, including, as I just said, with NGOs to provide the development assistance out there. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we need a climate of security in that country so that we can work there, Mr. Speaker, and build on development assistance. There's no point in building all those things and then fighting breaks out, inter-tribal fightings, and we lose everything. However, Mr. Speaker, let me say this, Canada is very much engaged internationally with our partners, most importantly with the United Nations, in achieving what she has said, because we both have the same interest, which is South Sudan as the new nation finding its feet in Africa and moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Gaspésie.